this for you, Chuck? We gotta get started, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
5:15.
Yep, all right.
Yeah.
Ready?
My husband works about a block away from Facebook.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And he commutes.
All the way from here
Yeah.
to Menlo Park every day?
Because we wanted to stay here. Yeah.
His job doesn't, do they offer like, do they have like a shuttle to take him up?
He can, there's a shuttle from the business office park that he can take over to the Union City BART. Most of the time he rides his bike from the Union City BART over the Dumbarton, and that's his exercise, you know. But sometimes he takes the shuttle if he's like really tired of
Because we actually, my
yeah.
he took the Facebook shuttle here.
Oh, I don't think he's allowed to do that because he's not on Facebook. Calling to order the work-study meeting of the Albany Unified School District. May we have a roll call?
President Trutain.
Here.
Vice President Doss.
Here.
Board Member Clark is absent. Board Member Hinckley.
Here.
Board Member Duran.
Here.
Student Board Member Weinstein.
Here.
Student Board Member Mala. Not here.
Yeah, I believe that she will be coming later. Yeah.
Okay.
So we will now move from here to the table for the work-study session.
Warriors. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's nice to see our student board member here. Thank you so much. So this is the single plan for student achievement for secondary. That's for Albany Middle School and Albany High School. I'm going to turn this over to, and McGregor. My apologies. I'm going to turn this over to Marie Williams, our assistant superintendent.
Good evening again. Thank you all for coming. I want to welcome our principals, Darren McNally from McGregor High School, Alexia Ritchie from Albany High School, joined by Liz Ryan-Mueller, assistant principal, and also Deb Brill from Albany Middle School. We, this evening, are considering the secondary school plans for student achievement. I have provided you again with the question guides that I think were fairly successful at our last session, and we will follow the same format as we did for our elementary school plans. And so we will entertain these three questions. How well did we do implementing this year's plan? How do we know if we were successful or not successful? How has this knowledge influenced our plans for next year? And so the same format that we used a couple weeks ago, we will entertain a question at a time. We'll give our site leaders an opportunity to speak to the question. And then if there are questions from our board members, we will entertain those at that time. And then my job will be to keep us on time and have us ending at 6:30 this evening. So we will begin unless there are questions. Excellent. So it's my pleasure to invite Darren McNally to begin our discussion of our school plans with question one: how well did we do implementing this year's plan? Each of you will have a couple minutes and then just pass the microphone down. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As Ms. Williams said, I'm the principal of McGregor High School, which is our continuation school. For those of you who are new board members, so continuation ed is designed to serve students who are at risk of not graduating. Under California Education Code, it's designed for students 16 and over. And to provide more flexibility and more options for those students. The biggest success that we had this year with McGregor, I think, is really much more clearly defining our place within Albany Unified School District and our relationship with Albany High School. Compared to last year's plan, that goal was removed from the latest version of the SIPSA for 1920 because it was actually the biggest highlight from the WASC mid-cycle visit that we had this year, that relationship's much more clearly defined. Our visiting committee chair said that he felt much more comfortable about the program now than he did 3 years ago when he first did an initial visit. And a large part of that was because he felt like the program had a much better sense of itself and its role within the district and within the community of students that we were trying to serve. Within that, our real success and our special sauce as a program is just simply that we're a lot more personal. That's really the biggest thing that we do, is we try to know our students, we try to know their needs, and we try to meet them where they are, and then get them across that finish line to graduation. I'll highlight one thing that for me is a standout moment, which is a time we worked really well together as a team this year. We had a student whose father passed away right before Christmas. And this is a student who was not on track to graduate. His mother's not able to care for him. And what I was really happy about as a school leader was how quickly our team came together to support this student, how quickly we found out about his needs, and were able to define kind of what's the teacher's role, what's the counselor's role, what's the administrator's role in supporting this student. And this student, it looks like, will probably be graduating and walking the stage in 3 weeks, which we're really excited about. And that really came from us knowing him and his needs, and how do we build a program to serve him. And that's really the things that we do I'm most proud of as a program.
Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it. I'm a little hoarse still from the prom, so forgive me. To highlight that, we did have a very successful prom. We had a successful year. We're happy to highlight a couple of items. I'd like to certainly start with a big endeavor which took a lot of different stakeholders, and that was our WASC accreditation visit in March. And we worked very hard as a young administrative team at the high school. Again, we had inherited not only a site plan, but we'd inherited a WASC plan, and we needed to quickly turn around and take ownership of that. And we really did a nice job, I feel, putting together a WASC plan that included 5 goals. They were also the site plan goals, and so we did some good alignment with the LCAP as well. We're very proud of those endeavors from the district to the site. We'd also like to underscore some of the events that we took upon ourselves to, again, take ownership of, which would be the social, emotional, cultural environment at Albany High School. Again, as a young administrative team, we inherited many different stories, one of which was the Instagram incident of 2017, and we were determined to rewrite that history, and so we did a lot of good work. I'd like to highlight Challenge Day this year. We were able to have all 10th graders, I believe, except maybe 5 or so, participate in a day-long event, and some of you were there as well. And so we're very proud of that endeavor, and we're happy to report that next year we'll be able to offer Challenge Day as well to all 10th graders. I'll turn it over to my assistant principal, Liz Reimler. Perhaps she can expand a little bit more on the social emotional competency work that we did this year, as well as implementing the behavior matrix.
Thank you. We already gave a report about the social, emotional, and social justice competencies to the board, but I think it is important to note that at this point, now that we've done the initial plan that was written by the administrators and the district team, and then sort of disseminated into the different schools, including the elementary schools, and now we have a visual for it at both the elementary and the secondary schools. So we have the poster project, which incorporated the students to create their language within the poster project. And I think the most exciting part now is that the teachers are getting really involved in it. We've been highlighting different parts of the plan throughout the year, actually for this full year and a little bit before. So every week in our newsletter, Ms. Ritchie writes, there's highlighting a part of the social, emotional, social justice competencies, tying them into things that we're doing on campus. For example, when we had the Holocaust assembly, and we had a wonderful speaker and author come and talk, and the kids were just completely riveted and attentive to a gentleman speaking for an hour. That's all he did, was tell his story for an hour, and the students were completely in tune. It was very amazing, and they were, and then so we would follow up with that, talking about the social emotional competencies that connected to that within the staff newsletter and also the student bulletin. So, and then now what we're seeing is that teachers are starting to, they've always taught the competencies. That's not new. Teachers have been doing that forever. But now they're starting to utilize some of the resources that we have for them, the poster projects, and incorporating those into their classroom, into their specific lessons. I've seen that through lessons that I've observed, and also just when I walk into the classroom. And so that is really, I think, the next and exciting part that's happening. Is it's becoming part of the vocabulary, part of the language, and the instruction, and it's happened very organically. Regarding the behavior matrix, when we came, we worked a lot with the plan or the matrix that was already written that the middle school had, and made some adjustments, and really focused on sort of the similar format where you have what is the behavior that's expected, and then the level of incidence once, twice, or 3 times. But within those, there's sort of a menu where you can kind of pick and choose and see what is appropriate for that student at that given time. So really involves a more contemplation. What will this student need? What kind of education does this student need? How can they make amends? How can they repair a relationship? Do we need to have a conference? Do we need to have a circle? And we've been trying to really keep students on campus by increasing our in-house suspensions rather than sending them away. We find that works a lot better. They can be monitored, they can continue to get their homework done and keep up with what's happening on site in this classroom. And sometimes we incorporate time for them to reflect and write about whatever choice they might have made that wasn't a great one, and sometimes research different things that might have help them understand better what to do next time differently.
Thinking about the successes from the year, I think that there are a number of different things we could highlight, but I think I'll highlight just a couple of our newer pieces. One of them, we did, as part of our shift, every year we try to sort of shift our behavior matrix a little bit, and really looking at our restorative practices and looking at the role of education and discipline as opposed to just the punitive nature of it. And one of the things that we shifted this year is for students who have issues with had issues with school with drugs and alcohol. Instead of it being a at-home suspension, it's a in-school brief intervention with our counselors. And so they spend the day up in the counseling office, and the counselors walk them. They've gotten them all trained now at this point on brief intervention, which is basically a process that they run them through that allows them to think about and reflect on drug usage and alcohol usage, and what the different impacts, and walks them through a whole process. And it's a research-based practice. And so we worked hard to make sure they were all trained in that, and we were able to implement that with a few of our students this year, and it felt really positive. Felt like we were really doing something for the kids, as opposed to, wow, you had a problem with alcohol, now go sit at home alone for the day, which really wasn't feeling appropriate. So that was a really positive change. We started an African American mentor program this year at our school. We had 3 fabulous teachers who stepped up to run it, and I partnered with them to get the infrastructure in place and the resources in place for that. And we got a lot of feedback from the students in the program. We surveyed them, and just overwhelmingly positive feedback of them, really just how much they got out of that connection, both with one another and with the teachers from the group. That felt like a really positive step. We're looking to see if we can do that with our Latinx students next year. It's a little more challenging because it's a much larger population, but we're working to see if we can make that happen. And additionally, I think one of the big pieces this year was just kind of exploring resources at other districts and looking at and picking and choosing what we can bring into our school. We did a nice training on trauma-informed practices that was very well received that we're trying to build on for next year. And just looking at how other students are using RJ and what we can, ways that we can incorporate that. And so just, I think that's been a really, and we've had teachers go out to different schools as well to, that have particular programs that we're interested in, and I'll talk a little later, but we have a couple pieces when we're looking at next year that we're looking at integrating. And then just our continued work, we've been really working hard at delving into our essential standards and common formative assessments, and how do we know if students are learning. And it's been a really intense process to get departments all on the same page with those, and really being able to administer common formative assessments and talk about them. And I feel like we've made some really, really strong progress in that area.
Questions or comments from the board?
You had said that you were going to be developing the mentorship program for another group of students next year, and I misheard you. For Latinx students.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the graduation rate out of McGregor, because in 2018 it looks like that was a strong 85. And on top of that, there were the students who completed the CHSPE or the GED, and with those, you were like at 97, which is it's really remarkable.
Thanks. I'll just toot my own horn a little bit more, and just say that McGregor's graduation rate is actually above the California state average for all students, so which is spectacularly good for continuation ed.
And I remember you spoke to it at the last session we had with the elementary school, but this year there was a notable decline across the board in terms of the academic scores, and you refer to it as anomaly, and I'm just wondering if the principals have some more ideas about what that might be. And I know someone had noted, I don't know if it was the superintendent or you, Marie, that said that there's ways of getting more information that we don't have access to at this time, maybe because we have to pay money or I don't know what, but there was, so, you know, if you could speak to that too.
Sure. So I think this is a nice segue actually into question 2, so thank you both for helping us get there. In terms of sort of getting more information, I think what I might have been referring to is like an assessment platform, which is something that we don't currently have. So a lot of our data is fed into Excel, and so we try to the best of our ability to sort of sort out student groups and sort of draw conclusions about the data sets that we do have access to. But you will notice that in all 3 of the plans, there's local assessment data. So that's data that's collected at the site level and not reported at a state level. And so some of that data is harder to sort of look at district-wide because we don't have a really robust system for doing that. So appreciations to all 3 schools for bringing their local data, and maybe in talking about this next question, they will surface some of that, and then also pay attention to your question about sort of declines. And I will say that we do have some preliminary information coming back from this year's Smarter Balanced Assessments at the elementary, not yet at the secondary, and I believe there's reason to think maybe it was a little bit of an anomaly, but don't quote me on that because it's just preliminary.
I just have something to add if I could, because perhaps this also leads to the question we were asked in terms of the participation rates at Albany High School. And one thing we did notice, and I'm going to definitely give credit to Liz Reimuller as my testing coordinator, I believe the jump was from the 85, 87% range to above 97%. And so when we test more students, we are going to get 2 pieces of information back. One, a more accurate landscape of what our students are actually doing. At the same time, though, I'm mean, you kind of be careful what you ask for, because once you start testing everybody, you might see that those rates decline a bit. But we are very proud of our participation rate. We did have, again, more people tested, and so we're thinking that might have had a correlation. The other piece, though, if you do dig a little deeper, one notable success we found is with our Hispanic students. So if you dig down to those scores, you'll see that I believe they were in the green zone for math, maybe, and the blue zone for literature. Yeah. And so, again, hats off to the folks who took the test seriously and who also performed then higher than some of the other student groups as well. And so we just wanted to point out that celebration.
Did you want to pose your question before we move on too far, sir?
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. The student that you spoke about, where you guys were able to recognize that they needed help and get them the help that they needed, did the student come to you and share that information, or did you guys recognize something that was happening maybe in the classroom or something like that that kind of drew you to it?
You know, actually, I mean, I think it's a good example of success. We were told by another student. And that, to me, actually is symbolic of the relationships that we have with our students, that they know that we are a support network for all of them. So it was actually another student who let us know, which then kind of activated the whole team. So we really try to have those relationships with the students, and that all students see us as supportive and caring.
Nice. And then for the challenge day, you mentioned that there were some students that didn't participate. Was there like a specific reason why, or?
You know, it's similar to, let's say, family planning lessons, anything that might be not controversial, but something that a family member is not comfortable with, or a particular student who does not do well with big crowds or anything like that. Again, our participation rate was well above 95%. We had very few people who were not electing to be there. I think, I'm not quite sure what they did as an alternative. I think they were back on campus.
We actually had students, because they went in 3 groups, a third of the class on Monday, a third of the class on Tuesday, and a third of the class on Wednesday. We had students who had told us that they were going to be opting out, which was their option because it is an emotional day, but who, once other students came back, got so excited that they were potentially going to miss out, that then they opted in. So we had a number of students opting in on day 2 and 3 based on what the previous group had reported.
That's
Okay, and then we will go right to question 2.
Maybe this is part of question 2. One of the things that I think you asked about participation rates, we tried something different this year regarding our structure of our testing. We created, checked in with the department chairs and created a separate modified testing blocks where just the juniors were testing while everyone else was not at school, and then everybody was able to be in class after the testing blocks, and it will be interesting to see how that affects. I think it may have affected, but we'll still have to see. We're not done testing. We're still doing makeups this week, our participation rate. But I think it might have also had an effect on our actual scores, because it really sent a message that this is important and we are making a special time for you here. And they were not in their regular classrooms. And I think that there was a level of seriousness and commitment that I noticed and I felt. So we'll see if that bears out in the scores.
I wanted to comment on that because I do have a high schooler, and I think that having that separate time at school and showing the students through the actions that this is important and this is special and we're trying to create an atmosphere where you can do well was just brilliant on your part, the administrative team. And also, I just wanted to say that I very much appreciate having this information about the participation rate, because we're more interested in how everybody is doing, and that's the 97% participation rate that you got to. You know, just like knowing how 80% of the kids are doing is not nearly as informative. And so what we need to see is this 97%, and that was quite an accomplishment to get there.
Would you like me to answer the second question? So for us with McGregor, by far the biggest outcome that we pay attention to is graduation rates, or I should say high school completion, and students basically ending high school on the terms that they're happy with. For some students, that's the CHESP or the GED. Other students, it's high school graduation. Some students make the choice to leave without a diploma and start community college. That's what we far and away pay the most attention to. So this time of year is very stressful for us because we have a lot of students kind of right there on the line, and we're watching what's happening very, very closely day to day. Looking at these questions, and I know this came up, but our state assessment data is not super helpful for McGregor because of how information is reported in KALPads. I know Ms. Williams, I think, addressed this, but we look at all students who are taking any McGregor classes as McGregor students. What's reported in KALPads and what's used for state assessment data is only students who are majority McGregor classes. So what we use internally is a little bit different than what gets reported for KALPads and those purposes. As far as what we do successfully, I think what I'm most proud of is how much more cohesive we are as a team now than we have been in the past. I have the same team this year that I had last year, and with the exception of an art teacher who's moving out of the area, I'm going to have the same team next year, which I'm really, really proud of. Also, we have settled on an instructional style that's very student-centered that seems to work best for our students. And from an instructional perspective, we're actually probably one of the most cohesive secondary level teams as a school. We also meet very regularly, and we've built a lot of these systems over the past 3 years to do a lot of work to really see our students and support them as well as possible. Our biggest strength, in some ways also our biggest weakness, is just we're small. And I like to keep the team a little bit smaller and focused, but that means we also don't have a whole lot of resources in terms of money and time and those kinds of things. This year we did go to the California Continuation Education Association conference. Ms. Williams helped us out with some funding for that, which we're very appreciative of. I got a lot of great ideas for the future, looking at models of best practices from some other schools that we're hoping to implement a lot more positive systems to reinforce kind of pro-social behavior and good attendance and those kinds of things. We have seen we've been implementing a lot of that to create a much better climate and community as a school, which is what I attribute our decreasing suspension rates and our decreasing chronic absenteeism rates to. But again, those are still very high, and we're hoping to have those come down in the future. So we're very happy with where we are instructionally. We're seeing a lot of good educational outcomes. We're still working to build a much stronger, much better community to support our students.
And some of the assessment data that I'd like to highlight includes our local assessments, which we incorporated into our site plan, and that would be our local GPA. And I might ask Darren to expand a little bit on that. But what we're finding is really some nice baseline data to determine whether or not students are moving towards a UC-CSU eligibility profile. Remember that they do need a certain GPA as well as satisfying a number of course requirements, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But we were very proud of looking at our GPA with a lens of what are we doing right and what do we need to shift when it comes to the different demographics that you see there. Darren was able to break it down into gender and ethnicity and social economic domains. And so we're very proud of looking at our GPA and seeing that most students are making a 2.0 or above. And so we just need to put the other puzzle pieces together to make sure that they're CSU and UC eligible. Which leads us into one of the criteria, which would be a third year of math, if not more competitively, a fourth year of math. What we've seen, and I did not include this, but we probably should reflect on that this year, the number of students who are entering and being successful in Math 3 and Math 3 Plus has gone up. One of the reasons being we've been able to restructure some of our intervention models. To be specific, in Math 3, we offer it as a standalone advisory. So we have a lot of students who are taking Math 3 and perhaps struggling. They're automatically assigned to this Math 3 advisory course. And so we're seeing that it's not a double math, but it certainly is the structural math in the classroom, and then your same exact teachers who are helping you at least twice a week. We've seen, again, an increase in the number of students enrolling and being very successful in that Math 3 course. We have, from previous conversations, also seen a slight bump up in our attendance rates. I believe it was a full percentage or so. And then we had a slight bump up in our graduation rates. We hope to continue that trajectory next year. And the one highlight that I'd like to say is that in the midst of all of this WASC, Liz, you were absolutely instrumental in getting us to a 6-year accreditation. And so that certainly is a feather on our cap when it comes to some of the data and some of the feedback that we've been given to say that we run a quality school, quality program, and we have a lot of goals to enhance that. I'll let Liz expand a little bit on our professional development endeavors.
Thank you. So our professional development at the high school is teacher-led, and we have a wonderful team of teachers who develop and organize different topics that they're interested in, and then they work in kind of a workshop model, and people select from what PD they want to attend, and then the offerings were so great this last time or the time before that they decided to have the same offerings and so that people could take an additional one. We had topics such as dealing with student anxiety, restorative justice practices, and other professional development where the teachers are taking their expertise and teaching each other, which is one of the most effective, proven effective types of PD, is when teachers are supporting each other in what they want to learn. It's the kind of PD that sticks and that people actually take back into their classroom and into their practice. And we've also had, of course, our overarching PD with our Museum of Tolerance, which we've been doing district-wide, and some of that other work, which was really, really well received, especially the last round with the Museum of Tolerance. The teachers really appreciated that, and I think they got a lot out of it. And I also wanted to mention one other thing, and I think it fits in here in terms of, you were talking about graduation rates and what students are doing once they leave Albany High School, and that is our counseling team has been working on for a few years, but now I think it's really starting to become part of the language of Albany High School, is the acknowledgement and the emphasis that going to a community college as a first step to a 4-year is a really great option for many students and for many families. And I think that we are increasing our understanding that that's a good way for many to go. We had a community college fair on campus organized by our counselors, and I hear more and more students proudly saying that, you know, they're going to be going to a local community college as a step to a 4-year, and I think that that's a really wonderful. It helps our college-bound students be more inclusive and include lots of kids. So thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I think, we also have worked on a lot of work on our local assessments, and, this year our science department, 6, 7, 8, spent half of our professional development day just revamping the way they were doing their assessments and really trying to make it a better representation of what they wanted 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to be able to learn in terms of the science inquiry process, and did some really solid work on that. So that was exciting. I think anytime we're able to really have meaningful conversations about teaching and learning between grade levels, it makes a big impact, and it also means that the data we're looking at is really going to tell us something more when we're looking at that from a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade perspective, and kind of being able to track that student as opposed to each assessment being so different that you can't tell the growth. So that was really important work that our science department did, and our math department has continued that work as well as our English department. And then I think, we always look at our behavior, our discipline data, our tardy data, and I think, while I think we have a great deal to celebrate as a school, I think it is important to continue to note that we have a lot of disproportionality with our tardy data, our discipline data, and our academic data that, while I think we're doing a lot of really good work towards making shifts and movement there, I think we just kind of continue to run up against barriers where we need more resources to make more significant changes. And I think, one example of that is that we've done a lot of work around PLCs, which is a lot of strong research supporting their success in terms of really being able to shift student academic performance. But we just kind of hit up against our roadblock that, in terms of budget cuts, in terms of being able to send people to PD, in terms of space, which you need in order to be able to run these intervention programs. We need more classroom space in order to do that, and just personnel to be able to run that type of an intervention program. So we kind of said, okay, well, this is about as far as we can go without more resources and without more space. And so I think it's been a lot of really good work of looking at the local assessment data, and for each teacher to be able to reflect on their own teaching practice and which kids are performing, which kids need more support. But in terms of a school-wide intervention piece, we're starting to look into different directions on what can we be doing to impact this data with what we currently have, since as we're entering to budget cuts and we're not looking at having more space, we need to figure out what we can be doing to impact this data with what we have now. And so I can talk about that more later, but that's something that we have spent a lot of time looking at. And what else was I going to say? I think that this year is an off year for the Healthy Kids Survey, so that that's always one that we really like to look at in terms of our school climate data. So we'll be looking forward to that next year. But I think that's where I'll leave off for right now.
Thank you all very much. Questions or comments from the board?
I just wanted to ask all of you, and I mean some specific questions that you may have, that you might allude to in terms of next year. And I guess, I did this with a critical lens. And so please know that I saw a lot of increases too academically, but I still had some other questions that I wanted to address, and especially since Ms. Ritchie has been really good at when she sends out her weekly newsletter to the staff. I do spend some time reading the articles, and there's some really eye-opening ones that I've certainly taken to heart, learned a lot in the area, especially of equity. And so all the time I'm going, equity now. So, this is kind of one of my issues, which is, while at McGregor, I do understand that the population's small, so when you have suspensions, they look larger than they are. But I was sort of thinking if there were 4 students that had been suspended in terms of what you see, and there were 17 students at McGregor, that still seems like a high number when you talk about the staff, the faculty that you have, how supportive everybody is, and why are those numbers still there? Why do those students, and something that, there's obviously areas you can't control at all, but I was just wondering if in terms of your plans, you're addressing that further. And you did mention that you got some best practices, ideas in going out to a conference, but I was just wondering about, that particular number struck me. Should I go on, or do you want to address that first?
I can address that.
Okay.
So the so that's 4%. That's not for students.
Oh, I thought it said.
So from
I
these
thought it
numbers, like I said, the KALB data is not quite an accurate portrayal, and that, without going into details, that was a necessary suspension for school climate and student safety concerns.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this though, it's pretty impressive that we've had 1 student for the entire year. And that was a pretty extreme situation that I'm actually very happy with how that ended up. That student's doing very well now. That was the situation involved rattled most of the staff. But we had the resources to deal with it. And we just chose to deal with it in a way that we felt was going to be best for the student and was going to be best for the teachers who were directly impacted. And actually, as a result of that situation, which was fairly serious, the relationships involved have actually all gotten stronger, which I'm really proud of, that we were able to do that as a team. And one thing I say about McGregor is if these students were doing okay, they wouldn't be with us. We don't specialize in students doing well. We specialize in students needing a lot of support, and sometimes they ask for that support in less than constructive ways. And we work really hard to have the means to support them when they do that. And as always, you know, we also have a lot of serious concerns around things like substance usage for our students. But again, you know, we really focus on that building relationships. I think we really operate from more kind of a public health harm reduction model than anything else. And we really focus on having the means to support students when things are not going well for them. And acknowledge that for some of these students, sometimes they have these moments when things don't go well for them. And we try to really support them and catch them and then bring them back when that does happen. And sometimes that looks like discipline processes that are really uncomfortable for everyone, but necessary. And more often than not, that looks like really healthy, really supportive one-on-one interactions that you might not even notice in passing.
Okay, thank you.
May I also just add, as a reminder, that the data on the dashboard is reflecting the prior school year, so 2017-18. And so sort of maybe one of the challenges of sort of using that lag data is that we're talking in real time about events that have happened during an entire school year, and we don't yet have data to just sort of substantiate that yet. And so we're waiting now, and in the summer we'll have data for this year, but we won't be writing these plans until the end of the next year. So I think that's maybe something for us to think through in educational services in terms of sites being able to bring forward plans that include sort of as relevant and as real-time data as possible. And I'm grateful that Darren has sort of his local assessment data, because that I think does come up to 18-19. So I just want to sort of remind us that we're looking at last year's data, talking about how we did this year, planning for next year. So it's a little awkward.
So that number for 17-18 of 4 students actually sounds accurate. Yeah, sorry. It's closer to 4% now. And I'll say that if my recollection is correct, almost all of those were substance abuse-related issues.
Thank you. I also saw that chronic absenteeism is an issue across the board, elementary as well. And but at the high school, you actually raised the question about is there some correlation between suspensions and attendance, which is a really good question. And the lower suspension rates at the high school, I'm wondering if there's a correlation with having an African-American principal. If there's any research about that, or if that's something we could look at in terms of the data to see if that's making a difference. Go ahead.
I think the structure at the high school over the past 2 years has really lent itself to developing those relationships, which allow us to get in front of the stories as opposed to having to react to the stories. And so I'm not quite sure about the ethnicity of the principal, but I am very proud of the fact that Assistant Principal Reimuller and Assistant Principal Pratt have now cohorted with a group of students for 2 years. Remember, they're 9 and 11 one year, and then they're 10 and 12 the next year. And so I do anticipate that that's going to be one of the reflections that we try to maintain, is that when you have developed those relationships with students, you are no longer in a situation where you have to punish quickly like an assembly line. You can develop a lot of relationships up front, and then you can really address some of the situations. Remember, it's not necessarily what happened, but it's also why it happened, and what can we do, and why is it not going to happen again. I don't know if you want to.
Okay, I just have 2 other questions. Real quick, one is that actually a student at the high school had raised this in the LCAP meeting, which was that felt there was some question about whether there's really a balance between the number of AP courses and the number of, for example, math intervention courses for the students that need that. And are you moving towards a more equitable balance in terms of supporting students that haven't quite made it academically yet or need that extra support?
Yeah, we think we're balanced in terms of the course requests, and there's not a lot of course requests for intervention classes, of course, but there's a lot of thinking that goes behind recommending a student for that. And so right now, Darren can confirm this, our intervention courses are certainly in the 20 students and below, which seems very balanced, and some of our AP courses can be 45 students or above. And so it all depends on what kind of balance or how you define balance, but right now we do feel that we're pretty balanced for the students who are requesting both AP and intervention and everything else in between.
That's great.
I'd just like to add that Mr. McNally and I have worked to pay attention to some strategies on master scheduling with an equity lens, which we went to some trainings for that, and where you look at your course offerings based on not only your student requests, but paying attention to what your students who may need intervention, that you're also making sure that they have access to the courses that are keeping them at school and that they want to attend, thereby increasing attendance overall and increasing engagement. And I haven't done much with creating the master schedule. Mr. McNally has done that, but we both are paying attention to master scheduling with equity lens.
Great, thank you. And the last question for Ms. Brill. I did see that the students that had mastered or were either at mastery level or above had really increased a lot this year in terms of math and writing in particular. But on the other hand, I was wondering, since I've sort of heard a lot about trauma and students being sort of at the edge sometimes in terms of challenging behaviors they have, and I'm wondering if going forward, if you have that support necessary financially or in other ways that's going to help address those issues.
Yes, so I think there's a couple ways I'd answer the question. You know, I think we've done a lot of work with looking at other resources, seeing how other schools manage, what are some ways that we can be approaching this. And I think that there's kind of two pieces. There's the school-wide approach piece, and then there's the kind of tier 3 kids who are really crying out for help, and what are we doing to support them, and what they need is really something different than kind of those general, or something in addition, I would say, maybe not different than, additionally to what we have. And I think with those students who have experienced trauma and are really struggling behaviorally in a way that really impacts the entire school environment, I think those students, it's all about relationship. And without a relationship, they are not going to function in our school. And a teacher who has 30 kids and is trying to manage their class while a kid is really struggling behaviorally, it's not enough of a relationship. That's an important relationship, but there's got to be these additional pieces in place. And so one thing that we would love to work towards when there's resources available, we've done a lot of research on campuses that have restorative justice / on-campus restoration rooms, and where you have a person who is staffing that room who is both strong with clear boundary setting, but also strong with relationship. And I think those two pieces have to go hand in hand. And I spent 2 days over my spring break observing. I spent several hours in 2 different rooms observing and watching kind of the flow of the room and how it functions. And what you see are those students who are those tier 3 behavior kids who have a relationship with that person. When they're struggling, that they're able to help and immediately talk the student through it. Hey, okay, what do we need to do? And how do I get you back into the classroom, which is always the goal when they can be. But for the kids who really escalate it and need a space to be able to de-escalate, that's not a hallway or a courtyard, it provides that as well. So, you know, right now we don't have the resources to be able to staff that room, but that's something that is still, like, our whole staff really came together and wants that to happen. So that's something we're hoping to work towards in the future, of just having, now that we'll have a few classrooms in the annex, we can actually protect a classroom space to make that happen, which it was not the case in the past. You know, and then the other piece in terms of the school-wide part, we had a team of teachers, I want to say maybe 8 different teachers who went to visit on 2 different days at middle school in Sonoma that has this really amazing advisory program. And we're going to be presenting it to our staff tomorrow and then the following Wednesday as a follow-up. And what they do is they group together the advisory groups that are small. Every single staff member is running an advisory, including administrators. years, and it's 6th, 7th, and 8th graders mixed together in a group, and they stay together for 3 years. The one in Sonoma, it's 4 days a week. Right now, we're only at 1 day a week. We're going to start off with our 1 day a week and hope to build from there, but with the idea of like really providing community, social, emotional learning circles for those students, which I think, you know, I think staff are really embracing this idea of how do we embrace social emotional learning, and how do we build community so that students who are making choices that are putting them in situations where they're feeling alienated, how do we keep inviting them back in and making them feel a part of our school, which is a really important piece.
I'll wait till question 3. We're at question 3. If you want to go.
I noticed the suspension rates at the high school are really low, lower than they've been in the past, dramatically lower than when I was there. So just wanted to point that out, that's great. And whatever you guys are doing, pass that on throughout. So that's awesome. I didn't want to just start with something not as great. What worries me is that if we took a tally right now of everybody in the room, minus you, because you're not there yet, and I said, who went to college? Everybody in this room would raise their hand. For one reason or another, you would raise your hand saying that you went. It worries me that we have some, I just said, not yet, but see, look at that. And it's not even your time yet, and you already went, right? But what worries me is that there are students that we have that it's currently our job to teach them that for one reason or another might not have the ability to be able to do that. And I have a lot of friends. I'm like a personable person, you know, people. I only have one friend that didn't go to college who's doing really well for himself. He just didn't go. He graduated from high school. He's had the same job for 25 years, and he's doing fantastic. He also has some other factors that factor into there, you know, being a white male in America, so, you know, he's got some good things going for him, right? There are some other kids that might not have that same privilege that also aren't going to have the ability to be able to just go to school because for one reason or another they're not doing well in these. So that worries me, and I'm just wondering kind of what the ideas are, because we're already talking about we don't get the scores in time to help those students when they need it. We get it a year late, which isn't going to, like, you know, help them. I know that when kids are at the middle school, then when they're going to the high school, then you guys can have the relationship there and say, hey, these are the students to identify, let's help them. But there are some students, like I said, that are in 11th grade. By the time we get the information, they're going to be 12th graders, and then what, you know? So I'm just wondering kind of what the thoughts are behind, like, what are we going to do? How are we setting them up for success? We're giving them, you know, good options for what's next.
I think one of the pieces of feedback I can give you lies in the Common Core State Standard philosophy of getting students not just college ready, but college and career ready. And I think Ms. Reimuller said it best. What we're starting to do then is diminish the tarnishing of going to a community college as being a viable next step out of high school. I think if you look at our exit surveys, we do have over 90% of our students going to college. We have about 60% to a 4-year, roughly 35 or so percent going to a 2-year. We're starting to see those numbers flip and dip a little bit, but we still have over a 90% rate of students who are eligible and going to college. But we're also very conscious of the fact that we should not expect everybody to fit a mold, and so the college and career awareness, which starts in kindergarten, is something we also take to heart. We are very proud, for example, of the students who enlist in the military. We're very proud of the students who decide to go to work first and then stay in the workforce. And one of the things we can do best is make sure they have those social emotional competencies, those traits of perseverance, those ideas that go way beyond a college degree. And we also have a number of data points that our counselors can share with you in terms of 1 year from now, where are students? Are they still in college, or are they in the workforce?
I think we're kind of blending, I think, questions 2 and 3, so I guess we're okay. I'll be really quick. I do remember the work that was done last summer in order to put every student at the high school in an advisory with a teacher that they had, and especially this that you mentioned about putting the kids that might be having trouble in math with a math teacher that could help them during advisory. I love that model, and I hope that you can continue to build on it, because it might not just be math, it might be another subject that's giving them trouble where you can put them in close contact with the teacher who can help them most. I also wanted to bring up, it was in your plan, Ms. Brill, about trying to revamp the current computer lab in the main building into a science lab. And I think that the idea is that then we would be able to offer laboratory science to our sixth graders? Not quite, or just have more facility?
Yeah, the idea for that is that each 7th and 8th grade science teacher would have their own classroom space. So they can actually set up more labs and have those stay in place. I don't think we're ever going to have the facilities for 6th graders to be in a actual lab, but our 6th grade teachers do have sinks in the room, and they have managed to do a pretty excellent job of running hands-on science activities even without a lab space. But for our 7th and 8th grader teachers who have been like setting up and taking down and moving on carts, at least the 6th grade teachers each have their own classroom, so they can set it up and leave it set up, versus the 7th and 8th grade teachers who have been wheeling around labs on carts throughout the day. So that's what we're looking to shift.
That's great. That's a good step. Thank you.
Alrighty, so I didn't do as good a job today, but some excellent conversation. We have about 19 minutes left, and so I'm going to invite each of our sites to briefly provide us with some highlights in terms of plans for next year, and then hopefully we can leave a little room at the end for closing questions and comments.
Our biggest area of growth for next year, I'd say we actually have two areas we're focusing on. The first one is doing a better job of being a team with our families. That's an area that we really are hoping to grow and do more of, and that's having more systems of just regularly checking in with them and communicating with them. There's often a myth that students in continuation schools, their parents don't care about them. That's 100% not the case. Most of them are actually very worried about their kids. And what we really want to focus on next year is doing a better job of being a team with the families, and getting the better understanding the families' needs, ways to support the students and the families, and how to get the parents on board. And that even means doing things like regularly checking in and just talking about how great their kid's doing. We don't want the first time that families hear from us to be when there's a problem. Our other big area is working a lot more in the area of in education jargon, the PBIS kind of things, building strong relationships with our students. We want to move towards doing a lot more incentive-based interventions around attendance. We've shown that kind of negative consequences are not really working with our kids. And so we really want to do more to reward them for being there and recognize the ones who are being really successful. And those are our two big growth areas for next year. We're pretty happy with where we are as far as instruction and having a student-centered model. And now we want to work better at creating more of a community inside and outside of the classroom.
Our mission is just to continue the great work that we have been doing. As you know, in 2019, Albany High School was noted by U.S. World and World Report as being one of the top 100 high schools in the state, as well as we broke the 1,000 for the nation, so that puts us in the top 5% for the state and the nation. We need to continue to do that good work. We're challenged, though, with having one fewer administrator on campus next year. We're not concerned, but we do have concerns in terms of how are we going to maintain this level of performance when we have literally cut our administrative staff by 25% at a high school that is asking us to increase in student enrollment. We're being asked to maintain our behavior matrix and our discipline records. With one fewer administrator, that is going to be a big challenge. We do think Albany High School is due to assistant principals, and we're hoping that we can still maintain that because, again, we're doing some very good work at the high school. It is going to be a challenge with one fewer administrator there next year.
One of the things that I want to say, and this is in connection to your question, Brian, how do we support kids who and help all kids be successful. One of the things that I think that we've done this year that is really great in this area, and I think in general, hopefully we can do more of it, and that's to give students who might not be as connected to school leadership opportunities. And we've done that with our 2P program this year, started last year with Miss Josette. Working with students who now are leaders in not only in the school, they're teaching other students, they're interfacing with the mayor and the city council, and the county, and the more opportunities that we can give students who may not be connected or as successful or may need intervention, I think that's one of the best interventions, is to give them leadership roles and help them choose their leadership roles would even be better. The other thing I just want to mention, you talked about some of the scores going down, dips in the scores. Please remember that you're not comparing the same group of students. You're comparing last year's juniors to this year's seniors when you look at that data. So those are two completely different groups of students who are being compared, and sometimes groups of students are just different. And so that's an important thing to remember.
I think looking towards next year, we have a few different pieces that we're really focusing on. And again, we're just trying to really work together as a staff. Darren mentioned PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention Supports. And one of the things that's really clear that research really shows is that when students feel like the entire staff is all on the same page, they do better, right? And I mean, it's kind of like the idea of two parents, that if two parents are giving the same messages and bound rules and what expectations are, we know that kids do better with that. And so, if they know that if they walk into this classroom, chewing gum, and they walk into that classroom chewing gum, they're going to get the same response. It's not about who's nice and who's not nice. It's about, oh, this is how we do things here at school. And that's a silly example, but you can extend that to kind of those bigger picture pieces. And so we've worked really hard as a school to really get on the same page of like, what does it mean to be tardy? Is it being in your seat? Is it being at the classroom door? Is it having material, and some of those things. So we've worked really hard to tighten those up, and then not just assume that kids know these, because we know that kids come in with a range of different pieces of knowledge in terms of what academic behaviors are expected, the same way they do around math or English. And so we are teaching staff, each department takes on a different area and is really explicitly teaching what do we expect from kids behaviorally in a positive, supportive, setting them up for success approach. And so that's something that we've worked really hard to tighten up this year as we've seen kind of different new behaviors. We're like, okay, let's really make sure that we have a nice container around students. And then within that, how do we really build community and really instruct on social and emotional learning? And the advisory that I was talking about, this team of teachers that we sent out to visit this school came back super fired up, and I'm really excited about our staff presentation tomorrow to see where teachers are with it. But that's what we're looking towards doing, is creating these cohorts of families. We're not going to use that word necessarily, but that kind of idea of like 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They're together for all 3 years, same teacher tracking with them, and smaller groups. And how do we build community with them? How do we teach social emotional learning? Eventually, we're hoping to add academic check-ins and pieces around that. And then the other piece is we had a really outstanding PD that Marie Williams helped us to organize on trauma-informed practices. It was something that staff has been asking for, and it's one of those things where these practices aren't just good for the kids who've experienced trauma, they're good for every kid. It's how do you work with students in a way that builds relationship and pulls them in, and how do you understand where they're coming from? Like if a student is acting out because they are needing more support and they're not making a good choice around how to do that, how do you recognize that, and how do you both hold a line while also inviting them in and making them feel supported? And so we're looking to partner with this same person for next year and build some sort of ongoing PD with her, to as well as like cohort groups of teachers to talk about and support one another around how we respond to student behavior in a really positive educational way that also keeps kids safe and holds a line. So that's something that we're really excited about. I could go on, but I'm gonna stop right there.
Excuse me, I haven't talked in a while. I have a few questions about the goal, some of the specific goals for next year. I appreciate that the high school's doing wonderfully and you want to continue to do the same, but your plan also outlines a couple of pretty ambitious goals and also some concerns. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about them. So one is your goal around having some more clarity between the administration and the school around the behavior matrix and also decisions around the budget, other kinds of decisions. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that because it seems potentially an area the board should understand more. And the second was the idea of doing some significant work on the curriculum. And so I'm curious to hear more about what that looks like, what you would need, what's driving that, and if there's anything else you think it would be helpful for us to know.
And you're referring to the current plan or last year's plan?
I think the plan for the goals for next year.
For next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was there a specific goal?
So goal 5 was about it has a couple of things embedded in it, but clearer communication about how the new behavior matrix is being implemented and more timely communication from the district office to the administration and faculty.
That kind of centers around communication, which if you look at the umbrella strategic plan, that's number 3, which is really enhancing communication. And some of the things that we've really done well, I think, this year, but need to work better on next year, would be how do we close the loop with communication in terms of what were the steps taken with that student and whether or not an email was sufficient, whether or not we have to sign a paper and put it in their box. Sometimes it was just the logistics that the teachers were asking us to clarify, not necessarily the essence of the communication. And so we're working a little bit more in our assistant principals as well with our assistant principal secretary who we're losing next year. We anticipate that to be a bigger struggle, of course, when you just have one person in charge. And next year we're going to try to do our best to, again, close that paperwork loop. That was the main concern, and that's why we included it. Some of the teachers also had some reflections, let's say previously, on restorative justice practices. And so embedded in that was a distrust of the system. And so they needed to be able to see it firsthand. I have an example where we had a teacher who had some incidents with a student, a couple of students who got on her computer and were very inappropriate. And so what we did was a restorative conversation with the students and the teacher. And whereas before she had some hesitation on some of those practices, I think now because she's been a part of that, she trusts the system a little more. And so part of this, again, was the paperwork logistics, and part of it was building trust with the teachers to make sure they understood what we did as a follow-up. The other piece that's embedded in here is the emergency planning and the evacuation training, which we are working with Dax Kajiwara on an overarching emergency plan for the district. That was missing, and so we're really happy to see that there's a concerned and a concerted effort to make sure everybody's on the same page. Tomorrow we're actually having a full evacuation drill, and that was a direct result of reading the goal and talking to some of the staff leaders to see what was missing in terms of emergency training. And so it's still a work in progress. We do need the district support to make sure it's aligned with all the other schools, but at the same time, we're taking ownership of some specific steps, like I mentioned, mainly tomorrow with an evacuation drill. And then which other goal?
Goal 2, administration and staff will work to develop a long-term vision for the classes and pathways, reconfigure the school's course offerings over several years.
This one specifically speaks to CTE, or career tech education. And one of the things that we are looking at is what do we do to specialize in a career tech pathway when we have a number of students who perhaps may come and go and not want that pathway 3 years from now? Is it appropriate for us to be changing our career tech pathways dependent on student course requests, dependent on, for example, a teacher who's interested in teaching that course? Career Tech has taken many different versions at Albany High School. I'll reference at one point they were going to go forward with the sports med, or what was the, I think it was a bigger sports med program, which were actually involved in the construction plans, and we had to say, whoa, Nellie, we don't have that teacher any longer who wants to do that big sports med program. I think it was sports med bio something. So Biomedical pathway, that was it, yeah. And so that was a major decision that we made, to take that off of the construction table and to really put our efforts behind a program that we thought kids were interested in. We sampled it this year, which is the design and engineering course. We have a teacher who's very interested in making sure that that's a long-term career CTE pathway, and so we committed to that. So the question is, does Albany High School now need to hone into a specific career tech pathway that we can support and it's sustainable, or do we allow others to explore different career tech pathways with a landscape, let's say, of a number of courses? We are the king and queen of singletons at Albany High School. We have many single courses. We only have, I think, 2 or 3 career tech pathways, photography being one of them, culinary arts being the other. And again, we're developing our design and engineering pathway. If we just stick with those 3, you'll see that this goal will be met if we can have a long-term projection and sustainability.
I was looking at goal 3. It's on 71 in the packet. Goal 3. Oh, for Albany High School. Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have specified. Actually, goal 2, excuse me, but still page 71. And I was actually having a conversation the other day with some other students who were wanting to participate in something that this process would entail, of looking at our curriculum, and you guys are saying that we want to make a curriculum that that helps for long-range planning and strengthening the existing classes that we offer. I know that there's a lot of students who would be really interested in helping out and giving feedback to curriculum development, and I know that that's been a very touchy subject for a while, but I think that if there was a way to collaborate and make sure that that conversation can be productive and not defensive or aggressive, I think that could be really positive for a lot of the students and the teachers. And so I'm only here for 1 year. It looks like this is a 5-year process, but I would be happy to help for that 1 year to make sure that students are working with teachers to create a curriculum that is more comprehensive. And I'm sure there's other students in the future who would be really happy to help with that. But I am really happy to see that that's on here, because I know that's a really big concern for students right now at the high school.
Just in the spirit of hearing more about challenges and change, I'd love to hear a little bit about what some of your concerns are about having the students in the annex, the 1st and 2nd grade, and what you're thinking about how that affects your sort of school dynamic over the year, site supervision, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have 2 answers to that. One is just that we're really trying to look at what we can do to make it as positive an experience for everyone. And we had a really lovely meeting 2 weeks ago with our 8th grade English history teachers and our 1st and 2nd grade teachers to talk about a buddy class type of situation and supporting with reading, and how, and just the idea that I think 1st and 2nd graders will bring out the best in our 8th graders, because they're just little and cute, and I think they're going to want to be role models for them in a different way than they feel with 6th graders, perhaps. So really trying to focus on what we can be doing around that. I think the challenges are there's still so many details that haven't yet been discussed or worked out, and so I think we're going to enter into the year trying to figure out a lot of those as we go, which is unfortunate, but we're going to all be doing our best to make it work for everyone. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think there are 2 things that one is just space. Like, I know that there's still a lot of concerns for us to be, well, where are they going to do PE? Where are they going to do recess? And, on our site, really feeling super crowded and impacted already. And so, how do you be a good neighbor and not exacerbate a problem that already exists and isn't going to be good for anyone? So it's like we're trying to figure out where that balance is. So I think that'll be one piece. And then, well, maybe I'll just leave it there. I think we're just going to have to figure out how to navigate that. And there's just a lot that's still not clear yet.
I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, just one real quick last thing, which is I'm new to the board, as well as a couple of other members, and I'm wondering if there's any way that we could be more helpful or more insightful as opposed to just reading something. If there's anything you think we should be doing to be more proactive in understanding the schools and ways in which we can assist all of you.
I want just one thing to say about that, which is just that I think what's becomes really tricky in Albany is that it's a small district, so we're already running with, without the infrastructure that larger districts have of a data person and a this person and a that person. And, you go, all these middle schools I visited, I'm like, how do you make that happen? They're like, well, we have our RTI coordinator and our restorative justice coordinator and our 4 counselors. And, you're like, oh my gosh. And so I think that we have to be creative. And I think we have to, listen to sites and really think about how do we shift things around and how do we pay attention to how you can leverage resources to really make an impact on students, because I think that we want to keep moving forward. We want to be impacting our data. We want to be reaching our students that we're not doing as good a job with, and everyone's working really hard, right? So I think in a time of budget cuts, which, puts a lot of pressure on the board, I think there also just has to be a real understanding and grasp of where the needs really are, so that we can be thoughtful about how we leverage that, and some positions that don't cost as much money, and how do we, really impact and continue. I think what I want to say about it is that there's no point being in education if we're just keeping things running. Right. The reason that I think all of us are here is because we want to impact our students and our world. Right. And so when we see that we have disproportionality across the board in our district with academics, with behavior, with all of that, it's not okay for us to say, well, we don't have the resources. We're going to cut an assistant principal. We can't get what we need for the middle school. So, so I think that we really have to all have a common understanding of what are those leverage points that we can do to keep making change, knowing that there's limited resources, and maybe bring in more money.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to what Deb just said, because the board is keenly aware that we're asking you guys who work so hard to move forward, and we know that you don't have things that you need, and we are doing our best in whatever ways we can, in a number of different ways, to try to improve things. So thank you very, very much, and we are aware of the needs, and you need to feel free to continue to bring those forward. Thank you.
I do want to thank everybody, both from the last board meeting and this board meeting, to work on the SIPSAs. I think each year that we do this, we take a little bit of a deeper dive into what we're looking at. One comment that I want to make, I was very impressed with all of the SIPSAs that provided a lot more local assessment data. So for example, when I look at the middle school SIPSA, and it's like 78% are being proficient here, and 80-something%, I can actually see that. And so I think there's a bit of a shift that's happening in our district of really being proactive and looking at data and hopefully having data drive instruction. So I want to thank everybody, and do you want to close us off?
Yes, so just on June the 11th, these school plans will be on the consent calendar for your potential approval. And I want to thank the principals for the time and effort to create these plans in collaboration with their site councils, and then also their time this evening coming and sharing the work that is happening at their schools. And thank you for your thoughtful attention and really great questions. Thank you.
So for the minutes, so you have it, okay? No, different answers to your question. It depends, it's an it depends answer.
I'm adjourning the special work session, the work study session, and now we need to convene.
President Trutain, if I may, for those of you who ordered food, including Miss Brill, it's in the conference room.
Not to call you out, Ms. Brill.
Sorry. In the conference
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Calling to order the regular meeting of the Albany Unified School District. May we have a roll call?
President Trutain,
Here?
Vice President Doss,
Here.
Board Member Clark,
Here.
Board Member Hinckley,
Here.
Board Member Duran,
Here.
Student Board Member Weinstein,
Here,
and Student Board Member Mala.
she'll be coming.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to ask if there's any public comment on our closed session items. Seeing no one here to comment on closed session items, we will adjourn to closed session with the plan of coming back into open session at 7:30.
This